Welcome to the Extraordinary Podcast, where we identify God's uncommon work in common life. Recognizing God's work requires intentionality, but articulating it motivates and inspires. Don't forget to subscribe to never miss an episode. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Scott Landon, who is a former attender here and is now a worship pastor at Flint Hills Church of the Nazarene here in Burlington. He shares about his life's journey and God's work in his life, how God prepared him for where he is now, and how God is using his passions for his glory. So let's get into the conversation with Scott. Scott, thank you for taking time to be a guest on our podcast and share a little bit about your experience and your life and ministry. So thank you for being here today. As we begin, can you share a little bit, kind of like your life growing up, where you grew up, church background, those types of things?
Yeah, I grew up in the home of a naval officer. My dad was in the U.S. Navy, and as a child, we moved around a lot in my early years. And he grew up in the Methodist church, and my mom grew up in the Congregational church. And due to our moving all the time, we never really got established in a church, and we went periodically. And so I didn't really grow up with a church background or any kind of religious training. But my family was they were conservative. My father was very high on respect, honesty, integrity, character, all the things that you would see in a Christ-like person, minus the spiritual foundation for it. And so I had a great upbringing and a great family life, but rarely went to church. And so I really had no spiritual background at all until I went to college. But my dad was great, my mom was great. They both have passed on. And I have an older brother who passed away when I was 13. He had muscular dystrophy. And then I have an older sister and a younger brother, and I'm still the kind of the middle one that's left. And both my brother and my sister are involved in church, and I know with my brother, I've been working with him ever since I became a Christian, and he finally gave in to the Lord, and he's serving him now. So, but great home life, and spent most of my life in the country, west of Williamsburg, Iowa, north of a little town called Millersburg, just off I-80. Moved there when I was 14, and that's kind of home. My brother lives there now at the home place. So,
Where are some of the other places you lived with your dad moving?
Oh, we lived in Woodbridge, Virginia, which was in a suburb of Washington, D.C. Norfolk, Virginia. Moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico, back to Woodbridge, Virginia, in a different house. And he retired the last time we moved back there. And then after that, we moved to Tucson, Arizona for 4 years. My mom had a sister that lived out there, so we went out there. And my dad always liked the West, so we went out there, and then we moved to Iowa when I was 13, 14 years old. And my dad was a gardener, avid gardener, and so we bought an acreage out in the country. And my mom was born and raised in Iowa. Her family's from Iowa. I have lots of roots in Iowa. And so around Grinnell. And anyway, so they moved back, and my dad he retired from the Navy. He was also a court reporter after he retired from the Navy, which was the profession that I went into, largely because I knew what it was about. So yeah, that's how we ended up in Iowa.
So you recently retired.
Yep. As
a court reporter. Can you tell us exactly what that is, and what are some things you enjoyed about it?
Yeah. A court reporter, there's two basic types. A freelance court reporter that will work kind of an independent contractor, their own business, or they'll work for a firm. And they go around and they take depositions, maybe at an attorney's office, and of different evidentiary depositions that are going to be used in court proceedings. And then there's an official court reporter, which is what I did for almost 35 years. And that is where you work for the court system. I was a state employee, and I worked usually for one specific judge that hired me. And they call them officials because they're an officer of the court and they work strictly in the court system. They don't do depositions outside of court. And our job basically consists of keeping the court record. We write down stenographically on a stenograph machine or a steno machine, word for word, a verbatim record of everything that's said in the courtroom. And then we keep that, we preserve that in case it's needed later. If a case gets appealed and the Supreme Court wants to know what happened in the trial, they request the record. So we produce the record in a transcript form so they can read it, because what we write down is shorthand, and usually the court reporter can read it and no one else can read it. Other court reporters sometimes usually can read other reporters' notes. But so that's what I did. I was the keeper of the record. I made the record. I kept the record. And if it was ever needed or is ever needed, even in my retirement, I'm getting requests for a divorce case 10 years ago. Can you give us a transcript? And so I have to get my notes out and produce it.
Is there some expectation that because you were the one who originally wrote or kept the record that you would then agree to be called later to?
Yes, that's the way I left it. Some official reporters, when they retire, they say, if you need a transcript of something I did, tough, I'm done. Call someone else. And that's happened, and I've had to do some of those transcripts because some of the older reporters write differently, and I'm able to read their writing, and so I was requested to do some of those. But when I retired, I told them, hey, if anyone wants something that I did, if I'm still alive, I'll do it. I just that's just I just thought that was the right thing to do.
So I don't know if this is even how you could even explain this, but you write in shorthand, which may be different from other court reporters.
Right.
What does that mean? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, there might be a we use on our keyboard we write phonetically. Our left fingers write an initial consonant, our thumbs write vowel sounds, and our right hands write the ending consonant of a syllable. Cat, for instance, we would write the k sound with our left fingers, the a sound with our left thumb, the t sound with our right fingers on banks of keys. It sounds complicated, and when you first start, it is complicated. But after you practice, you hear sounds, and your fingers just automatically, it's like playing a piano. And I've found that musically inclined people tend to be good court reporters because there's a point where you reach and you have to disconnect from the mechanical aspect of it and let your mind just take over, and you hear sounds and your body just reacts. Now, the way you get your speed up to really get fast is you write in brief forms, they call them. So if someone says, have you ever been, that's one stroke. You press simultaneously, you'll press like 11 keys when someone says that. And so before they're even finished with the phrase, you've already got it written down. Greater weight of the evidence, beyond a reasonable doubt. Those are all one, boom, boom, boom. And so you get up to 300 words a minute, and you need to be 95% plus accurate. And so people write different brief forms. I have a different brief form for greater weight of the evidence than someone else might. And so you kind of customize your writing as you go along, and so you'll look at someone else's notes, and like, what is that? And they'll say, well, that's how I write beyond a reasonable doubt. Oh yeah, anyway. So people customize it to their own, their own style, and some people use brief forms for everything so they can write real fast. And I have a tendency to write out things, and anyway, so everyone's got their own little idiosyncrasies.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
And you mentioned about music and how those who might be more musically inclined might be more naturally gifted at court reporting. You are someone who is musically gifted. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about your love for music, how you developed that, and what you love about music?
Sure. Music is a huge part of my life. I grew up with music. Both my mom and my dad were really good singers. My dad played the guitar, and when I went to, and I played the guitar when I was young, probably fifth or sixth grade. I started taking lessons, and then I started singing. I found out that I could sing, and I liked to sing, and all through school, I was in music, anything musical I could be in, and in college, I was a biology major in college, but I took as many music classes as I could, and was in plays, musicals, and I got into the band scene. I was a lead singer in a band in my college years and after college. All through high school, I played my guitar and sang at different events, and I had a gig at the Amana Holiday Inn that used to exist on the Little Amana exit off Interstate 80. There used to be a place called the Village Pump Lounge. I played there when I was before I was of age. My parents had to go with me because it was a bar that people would wait in until their tables were ready. And I played there 2 weekends a month for like 2 or 3 years during my high school. It paid well. And one of the Minister and Mates retreats that we had several years back was there. And in the room the banquet room that we were eating at, I looked over in the corner, and the piano that I used to sit next to that had with little thumbtacks made letters on the back of it that said Village Pump Lounge. And it had become pretty useless, and they had just stored it in that corner of where we were eating. And I saw it there. And anyway, I gave a testimony about that was my old life, and this is my new life. And it was just amazing how I took my music from there. And when I got saved, I just focused my music on praising God, So it was kind of cool.
And you've been involved in leading worship and facilitating that for many years.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy about that?
Oh, wow. I really enjoy leading worship. Music has the ability to just touch people's hearts, their souls. It moves people, any kind of music. And so it's kind of an avenue that we can go down and meet God. And what I like about leading worship is it gives me the opportunity to use music to connect people with God. And so I always tell people, I love worship and I love leading worship, but it's not the songs that we're taking joy in. People will say, "Oh, I love this. I love that song. Really touched me." I said, "It wasn't the song that touched you. I used the song to get you to the one that touched you." And so it's just a privilege to be able to open the door so that people can access God through worshiping, because we're there to worship Him, and it is a response to who He is to us and what He's done for us. And it's such a privilege to be just to be a musician for Him, and to help lead people to the foot of the cross using music and using worship, and then just I always like leading worship for pastors. Now I've been doing a lot of preaching, but I always felt like I could help set the table for the pastor. Okay, it's ready. It's ready. Everyone's ready for the message, and so. That's why I love leading worship, is because it connects people with God, and if I can be part of that connection process, it's an honor, privilege to do that.
Now I'm sure part of this is you have a call to ministry.
Yes.
And you are ordained. Can you share your call to ministry with us?
Yeah, it actually happened when I was attending church here at First Church, and we went to I've been struggling with it a little bit, or just mulling it over. God was really working on me. We had been through, I think the time, I was here for about 8 years and had 3 pastors during that 8 years. And I got a call from Pastor Ron Jewett out of the blue one day, and they were looking for a worship leader. And I'd done kind of as a lay person, led worship periodically. When Marcus Whitworth, who was minister of music here when we came, was here, he trained 4 or 5 of us to be worship leaders, and he had classes, and so I was in process, but Pastor Jewett called me, and at that time we had just gone through a pastoral transition, and I told him, I don't feel like I can leave First Church because I felt like I needed to be here to help during this transition, and I said, but I'll pray about it. And a year and a half went by, and I was at a Promise Keepers conference in Minneapolis with a group from here, and the theme was choose this day who you will serve. And where I sat for 2 days, there was a beam in front of me, and the only thing I could see on that banner was the word choose, and it just kept hitting me in the face. And I prayed, and I chose. I said, okay, I got to do this. And so I came back and I prayed, talked to my wife, Tony, and I said, I need to call Pastor Jewett. And so I did. And because he wanted someone on staff kind of as a part-time person. And so I thought, that's my chance that's my opening that God gave me. And so I called him back and I said, hi, Pastor, remember when you called me a year and a half ago? And I said I'd pray about it. Well, I prayed about it. And we met, and that was my official call into ministry, and we had to get permission from the DS at the time, Ron Doolittle. He came down because he was worried when I left here, maybe all my buddies would leave with me, and we're in the same town, and we worked it out and said it's not going to happen, and so we talked to everyone, and it was a good transition, and so shortly after that, we transitioned over there. All 3 kids of ours were at home still, involved in the children and youth department. So that was a little tough, but shortly after that, I began the ministry preparation program through Nazarene Bible College and started taking classes and doing all that stuff, and on my ordination process. So, but it's been great. It's just been.
And you've been at Flint Hills ever since?
Yeah, I've been there ever since.
Now, not necessarily recently anymore, but Pastor Jewett has retired.
Yeah.
Which you have been filling most of at least the preaching type void.
Right, right.
So can you share a little bit about the responsibilities that you are now, and what you enjoy about the extra opportunities you're having?
Yes, a little intimidating at first. I've been a Sunday school teacher and a teacher for years, and so I love to teach. I'm used to being in front of people, and so we had Terry Chapman came for a couple of months right after Pastor Jewett retired to kind of help us, teach us, give us some hints, and that was so helpful to me personally and to our church. But after he was done with those 2 months, I took over and started doing the preaching and continued doing the leading worship, continued teaching Sunday school, and then we have 2 services on Sunday. But my messages started out is Sunday school lessons, almost more teaching than preaching, and I really didn't notice it. But after a few months, I had some people come up to me and said, "You're preaching," and somehow, some way, it just sort of morphed into something different and I hadn't really grasped it until someone told me, and so it's become a little more natural, and the more I prepare sermons and the more I do it, the more enjoyable it is. It's some days they're tough, sometimes it's just tough, but it's been an honor. It's a great church, and so the responsibilities have been a little bit of a burden, but it's been a joy more than anything, and I'm just glad that I'm there and able to help out.
And now that you're retired from the court system, right, you have a bit of time to breathe a little bit
more
now.
time.
Yeah. But Sundays come awfully quickly.
They do. You know that.
So now, as you think about the church, whether you want to talk about locally, globally, what's giving you hope about the church right now?
Wow. I see a lot to give me hope about the church in some of the things I've noticed within the church and even maybe parachurch or outside the church, in that our culture has really shifted a lot away from the Bible, away from holy living, and even the churches have kind of I don't know, caved in or given sway to the ways of the world. And I understand. When a pastor sees his congregation dwindling down, he wants to do whatever he can to fill the pews. And one of the ways they do that is to preach or teach a culturally popular message. And it gets people in the church, but not necessarily into the kingdom. And that's what we're after. And so you see the pendulum swinging that way, and it's scary. And I think the church for so long has been kind of complacent. Historically, we kind of had the government on our side for many years in this country, and now it's not that way anymore. And so the church, I think, had a wake-up call, or is in the midst of a wake-up call. And now I see the pendulum swinging the other way, and I see, just in this year, we see like movies like the Jesus Revolution or online, the Chosen series has reached millions of people. And it seems like people are saying, look, the church has been awakened. And so we're starting to see a movement of these things that are reaching into our culture. And that gives me hope. It gives me hope when I see churches like in Asia and in Africa, where we sent missionaries years ago, and those churches are rising up against the culturally influenced churches, like the Anglican Church, for instance. The African Church, Anglican Church in Africa, is coming out against some of the teachings of that church in Europe, saying, look, that's not biblically orthodox teaching. And so they're standing up for the gospel truth. They're standing up for Scripture. And that tells me that way back when, we did something right. And we're seeing the fruit of that in those strong churches in Africa. And that's what I hope we get to that point too, where we can start being strong as a church, theologically strong. And I'm seeing that. And that's encouraging to me. When churches are persecuted, that's when they grow like crazy. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing that way, and I'm expecting some great growth. I'm expecting some revival to happen, to break out. People are not afraid like maybe they used to be afraid to open their mouths. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing courage and people witnessing with power, and so that's an encouraging thing to see in the Nazarene Church. And in the church in general. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I agree with you. I think, man, you had some powerful statements there. So thank you for sharing. As you look back on your life, God has prepared you for where you are now.
Yeah.
And obviously, when you're 15, I don't care who you are. You're not necessarily going to imagine how you are going to be after you retire, right? But I say this to maybe challenge those who are listening, that God is preparing us. How has God prepared you for where you are today?
He put very influential, godly people in my path. And if I hadn't met some of those people, I don't know where I would be. A good friend of mine, Pat McReynolds, I met in college, and she's the one that kind of led me to the Lord. And she was in a PR group that sang, did concerts at William Penn College in Oskaloosa. And so I went to a concert just to watch them because I like music, and I didn't know, I was still biblically illiterate, but I got saved at that concert because I'd listened to the message and that music, and afterwards I just told them, I don't know what's going on with me, but something's going on. Mm-hmm. And that group led me to the Lord. So that was the start. God placed that person, that group of people in my path. And then next was my wife, Tony. Without her, she is she keeps me on track in every way you can think of. And so God placed her in my life. And she's been steady all throughout, inspirational. And God placed teachers here at First Church. I met some great teachers and leaders that have guided me. And so I don't think we can stress enough the importance that you can have and I can have being those people that come into people's lives. And there might be someone down the road that said, if it wasn't for Jeff Alexander or if it wasn't for Scott Landon, I wouldn't be where I am, because they came into my life at a critical moment and just changed the trajectory of everything. And so I had those people. God guided and directed me with people like that. And then he gave me opportunities. He said, hey, here's the door. It's open. I've given you the talent. I've given you the desire. I've given you the ability. I put people in your life. What are you going to do with it? You're going to walk through this door, or are you going to walk away? And thankfully, I've chosen to walk through most of those doors. There's been times I've done stupid stuff and didn't. But he has guided me in that way. And he has blessed me with something that I love, which is music, and then doubly blessed me with the opportunity and the privilege of using it to praise him and to lead others in praising him with it. And so, man, I am one of the most blessed people on the planet in all of those ways. So he's just guided me all along.
Well, that's a great challenge for us. Of God put people in our lives, and you could be that person for somebody else.
Exactly.
And it's important to be faithful with the opportunities Jesus gives us, which can, as you said, change the trajectory of someone's life. So, well, thank you for sharing today and being on our podcast. I appreciate you coming back here and investing in this church a little bit more. And thank you for your service to the kingdom in your ministry. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast. Be on the lookout for how God does uncommon work in common life. And please subscribe to never miss an episode.